Hello folks, and welcome back to my video gaming channel. Today we're talking about the Sega Mega Drive game Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog is a multi-directional scrolling platform game developed by Sonic Team and published by Sega in 1991 for the Sega Genesis and the Sega Mega Drive. Back in the early 90s, the battle for the video game market wasn't like today's three-way bloodbath between Nintendo, Sony and Microsoft. It was a one-on-one showdown between Nintendo and Sega. As the two companies fought head-on for the hearts and wallets of millions of game players worldwide, one of Nintendo's clear-cut advantages was an understated little plumber named Mario. Sega desperately needed a response to the fantastic Super Mario Bros. Series, and so Sonic the Hedgehog was born. Sega's 1991 take on the side-scrolling 2D platformer was fast, colourful, challenging and filled with personality. Packed with big, challenging levels and featuring finely tuned, deceptively simple gameplay, Sonic the Hedgehog was a breath of fresh air and an instant hit. Sonic was my first game when I purchased my Mega Drive. I was totally hooked with the overall graphics and sound effects. I'll always remember the first time I heard the digitised, harmonised Sega leading up to the title screen. Sonic the Hedgehog was the game that introduced me to the 6-bit gaming technology, and I was so impressed and so hooked on this game. So 32 years later, here I am, giving my review of this game. Sonic the Hedgehog is a 2D side-scrolling platform game. In an attempt to steal the 6 Chaos Emeralds and harness their power, the evil Dr. Ivo Robotnik has trapped the animal inhabitants of South Island inside aggressive robots and stationary metal capsules. The player controls Sonic, who aims to halt Robotnik's plans by freeing his animal friends and collecting the emeralds himself. The gameplay centres on Sonic the Hedgehog's ability to run at high speeds through levels that include springs, slopes, bottomless pits and vertical loops. The levels are populated with robot enemies inside which Dr. Robotnik has trapped animals. Destroying a robot frees the animal, but it is not necessary to complete the game. The player must also avoid touching spikes, falling into bottomless pits, being crushed by moving walls or platforms, and drowning, which may be prevented by breathing air bubbles from vents. Sonic's main means of attack is the spin attack, in which he curls into a ball and spins his body, damaging enemies and certain obstacles upon collision. This may be performed by jumping or rolling. At the start of the game, the player is given 3 lives, which may be lost if Sonic collides with hazardous enemies or objects while in possession of no rings, falls to the bottom of the level screen, or exceed an Act's 10-minute time limit. Signposts act as checkpoints to allow Sonic to return to the most recently activated post when he loses a life. The time resets when he returns to the checkpoint. The game ends when the player runs out of lives, although the player may return to the beginning of the act with 3 lives if they have a continue. Scattered around each level are gold rings. Collecting 100 rings rewards the player with an extra life. Rings act as a layer of protection against hazards. If Sonic holds at least 1 ring when he collides with an enemy or dangerous obstacle, all his rings will scatter. Sonic can also recollect some of them again before they disappear. If he is hit without holding any rings, he loses a life. Shields and temporary invincibility can be collected to provide additional layers of protection, but certain hazards such as drowning, being crushed, falling into bottomless pits, or running out of time kill Sonic regardless of rings or other protection. The game is split into 6 principal zones, followed by a short final zone. Each main zone has its own visual style, and while some enemies appear throughout, each zone has unique enemies and obstacles. Each main zone is split into 3 acts, all of which must be completed. At the end of each main zone's 3rd act, the player confronts Dr. Robotnik for a boss fight. For most of the fights, Robotnik's vehicle is fitted with different weapons. After completing the 6th zone, the player continues to the single level final zone for a last encounter with Robotnik inside a large machine environment. If Sonic reaches the end of any zone's Act 1 or Act 2 while holding at least 50 rings, a large ring appears through which he can jump to enter a special stage. In the special stages, Sonic is continually curled up in his spin attack animation and bounces off the bumpers and walls of a fully rotating maze. In these levels, the player earns a number of continues for each multiple of 50 rings collected, but the main goal is to attain the Chaos Emerald hidden within the maze. Colliding with any of the blocks marked goal ends the level. So let's have a little look at these levels. Let's start off with the Green Hill Zone. Green Hill Zone is the very first Sonic zone ever made and still probably the most well known after all these years. The palm trees, the orange checkered hillsides, the spiky flowers, the original introductory tropical zone set in and around a rocky bay. You don't get any more nostalgic than this. It is designed to be fast and simple, with long open stretches, twisting tunnels and loop-de-loops, but watch out for classic badniks and large spike pits. Green Hill Zone has 3 levels: Green Zone 1, Green Hill Zone 2 and Green Hill Zone 3, where you fight the boss. In the Marble Zone, the sky has darkened as Sonic moves into his 2nd ever zone, starting off on the surface of a mountainous forest region. There are ancient ruins lying around and huge pits of boiling lava to leap over. Go underground to find a whole massive dungeon maze made up of narrow corridors and loaded with traps, deadly devices and small puzzles, taking up the majority of this large level. Marble Zone is a long, slow-paced stage. Now we're on to the spring yard zone. Technically, this is known as the pinball or bouncy stage. Seemingly set just on the outskirts of a city, the slightly bizarre and loosely casino-themed arena will throw Sonic around and introduce him to the bumpers and moving blocks that will make this type of level one of the most common in the series. Now the Labyrinth Zone is the original water level, and it is indeed a tough one, set in the ruins of an underground cavern, mostly submerged in water. Sonic will have to navigate the narrow tunnels and keep an eye on his ever-depleting supply of air while under the water. There are various puzzles to solve and sticky situations to work your way out of. Being honest with you, I wasn't a big fan of the underground water zones. I found it a little bit slow, and I think the whole point of Sonic the Hedgehog is to be fast. And that brings us to the Starlight Zone. For me, this is one of the fastest levels in the Sonic game. This unusually peaceful highway suspended in the urban skies is the first of its kind, and although brief, is more fun than it is difficult, as long as you're careful to stay to the upper routes and avoid the many death drops of the lower ones. The Starlight Zone is notable for having a huge amount of alternative routes and areas to explore, and it's filled with loop-de-loops, seesaws and fans. This gorgeous zone is absolute classic Sonic. Now the Scrap Brain Zone is the first central headquarters of Dr. Eggman's empire and is one of the toughest Sonic levels in existence. Acts 1 and 2 of this final lab are set in and around a giant grimy industrial factory loaded with traps, while Act 3 is set beneath the base and more resembles the underground water caverns of the Labyrinth Zone. Unlike the other levels of the game, each act has a different appearance, and structures and obstacles vary too. And finally, we're on the final zone. After taking a detour through the water-filled caverns beneath Eggman's base, Sonic pops back up to the factory to be confronted with the bad Doc himself for the final showdown of the game. The appearance is the same as Act 2 of Scrap Brain Zone, in which you begin in an open room with a high ceiling. That's right, there are no rings for this one, so if you get hit, you get dead. Let's have a look. I mentioned earlier the special stages. When you complete either Act 1 or 2 in any of the zones with at least 50 rings in your possession, you'll notice this giant ring hanging around in the air near the end of the Act signpost. Jump into it and you'll teleport to an alternative dimension where the 6 Chaos Emeralds are hidden. Let's have a look at some of those special stages. Now, if you're expecting a supersonic after collecting all these emeralds, then I'm sorry to disappoint, but that concept was not created until Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Sonic the Hedgehog was a commercial success. It became America's best-selling video game for several months in 1991, outselling Super Mario. By Christmas 91, Sonic the Hedgehog had sold nearly 1 million game cartridges in the United States. It was also the Blockbuster Video's highest renting game of the year. In the United Kingdom, it was a top-selling Mega Drive game for 2 months following its release. Sonic the Hedgehog was the best-selling home video game of 1991, with 2 million copies sold worldwide by the end of the year, becoming Sega's best-selling home video game up until then. In 1991, Sonic the Hedgehog helped Sega generate a gross revenue of $1 billion in a console sales and capture a 65% share of the European console market. Sonic the Hedgehog set a Sega software sales record with 2.8 million cartridges sold by March 1992, including 1.8 million copies in the United States and another 1 million in Europe and Japan. The game went on to sell 3.7 million units by October 1992 and 4.5 million copies worldwide by November 1992. By 1997, the game had sold over 14 million copies worldwide and earned over $400 million, 860 million adjusted by inflation. That's higher than the 200-300 million typically grossed by the blockbuster movie at the same time. The original version, bundled with the Sega Genesis Mega Drive hardware, had sold over 15 million copies as of February 2009. The mobile game version had also sold 8 million paid downloads by 2008. 482,960 units were sold on the Xbox Live Arcade as of 2011, and over 500,000 paid Android downloads were sold between 2013 and 2016, bringing total sales to approximately 24 million copies sold worldwide across all platforms. Sonic the Hedgehog has maintained its popularity and has since been considered one of the greatest video games of all time. Sonic the Hedgehog was a great game in its day, and though some of the Sonic subsequent games substantially improved on the formula created by the original, this first game still holds up nicely. For me, 32 years later, how would I rate this game? Well, for me, I'm going to rate this game today 8 out of 10 stars. It is a game that you will replay and keep coming back to. It is an absolute classic of a game. Well, there you go. Okay folks, that's my review of Sonic the Hedgehog. If you liked this video, then please press like. You can also leave a comment. However, it would be brilliant if you would subscribe to my channel and join my gang. If you do that, then you're obviously a brilliant guy just like me. See you later guys. Bye bye.